Hey, pastors and leaders, thank you for joining us for another episode of Spirit Anointed Leadership. I'm so blessed that you've decided to give us some of your time today. Whether you're watching this or listening to it, our whole desire and goal is to equip, empower, and encourage you as we go after the mission that God has given us. And I'm super stoked today because I've got my good friend, Geoff Eckart, with me. Geoff, thanks so much for joining us today. Geoff's a good friend, a great man of God. He's the senior pastor of Daybreak for 2 years. Has it been 2 years or not yet? Almost. Yeah, 18 months. So senior pastor of Daybreak, but before that, you were a youth pastor for many years and then started Never the Same Camps and CYC, which stands for Claim Your Campus, and then Soul Exercises, and you got your own podcast, the Thought Factory podcast. Interestingly enough, you were on the governing body that hired me 12 years ago. So
I know, exciting times.
Yeah, so people can blame you. I don't know. That's part of it.
No, I'm proud of that.
But Geoff, you and I were in a meeting with about 30 folks a couple weeks ago, and you made this statement that rocked everybody's world in that room today, and really was kind of the passion behind getting us together for this particular episode. And so I just remember you making the statement, and it was like a bomb in a good way. Like you could hear a pin drop kind of deal, a bomb dropped on us. It was a truth bomb, if you will. So I'm not going to steal your thunder. What did you say that day that caused us all to kind of waken up a little bit?
Something I've been thinking about a lot is what's the pivot point in society for the church right now? And my background working with students for over 30 years. And now being in a lead pastor position, it's even more interesting to me to think, where are we kind of capturing the future in our church? And I was in a meeting with some leaders, our daughter Olivia and some others in Kansas City a couple months ago, and we were just praying about the Claim Your Campus initiative, students praying at their school, and something really stuck out to all of us, and it really rocked me. And that is the idea of, and I've thought about this a lot, of what do we do to capture the 12-year-old? Mm-hmm. And to me, I immediately came back and just started sharing that with people in my circles, our board of elders at Daybreak, and also our board at Never the Same, and both staffs. And what I've been thinking about is, and I think they're the most important and strategic person to reach right now in the local church. I know for years, one of the things I heard a lot was, if you can reach like the 35-year-old male,
right?
A lot of movements and church growth strategies were built on that in the past. I think right now, my perspective is the 12-year-old is the most important person to reach, because they are at that pivot point now in our society where I think that's where we win or lose. Evangelistically, we do. The numbers, the percentages are skewing down towards, people coming to Christ. It used to be a lot of that happened in the high school years, and then it's gotten younger and younger. Now it's skewing more towards children. But I think 12-year-olds are really important. And it's interesting how 12, that age is in Scripture quite a bit.
Yes.
Mark 5 is the one that stuck out to us, this idea where Jairus comes to Jesus and says, my daughter is dying, come heal her. He goes in there, and he says, she's not dead, but asleep. I think that's a statement on this generation.
It's powerful, John.
A lot of people look at students and they say, they're gone, there's nothing there, we can't reach them, they don't care, they're apathetic, all the negative things. But I just been thinking about that as a ministry and as a pastor, is what can we do to reach 12-year-olds? Because if you can reach a 12-year-old, that means you can reach a family. And I think that's one of the most effective and easiest way, in some way, to reach families is through that age group right now. Yeah.
So let's go back for just a moment. You kind of mentioned this. I can remember that day we talked on that day about the fact that the old stat used to be 80% of people that are going to become Christians are going to do so they're going to open up their heart to Christ by the age of 18.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is that, as you're saying, that number continues to go down. In other words, the number of people that are coming to Christ, that 80% is actually happening before they're, 14 or 13 or whatever. That number is getting much younger than it used to be.
Yeah.
And I think another critical, part of that is that the 12-year-old today is not the 12-year-old that I was when I was growing up.
Yeah, for sure.
They're a totally different entity, if you will, than the 12-year-old that I was when I was growing up. So let me ask you this question. What do you think if we begin to believe that, if we begin to believe that the 12-year-old is that person that we really ought to be doing our best to reach for Jesus, what are the implications on the local church in that way? I just think huge implications.
Yeah, there's a lot. And I keep thinking about that. Like one of our elders at Daybreak said, well, what are 12-year-olds doing? And one of the first responses was, they're playing video games.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what 12-year-olds are doing. And
yes.
they're in that in-between age. And I do think that that is a very poignant question to be asking as leaders is, what are 12-year-olds thinking? What are they experiencing? And what are their parents going through right now? The post-COVID society, that those 12-year-olds, even that you and I from our generations, they're different than 2 years ago, 3 years ago, way different. I mean, the differences between what has happened with 12-year-olds in the last 2 years, going into the COVID era, they were 9-10 years old. And the other interesting thing right now, as we record this in 2022 about the 12-year-olds, that they represent the very end of Gen Z.
Yes.
They're the tail end of that generation. And then there's going to be, a flip into a new generation, and people call them different names, but whatever the names are, Gen Alpha, whatever.
Right. So huge. Again, they're playing video games. They're kind of tied into, having a phone, and hopefully having a phone for many of them. Yeah. You've been involved in youth culture, as you said, for 30 years. Yeah. Involved, obviously, as a youth pastor, Never the Same camps, again, Claim Your Campus, soul exercises, all those things. What would you say is the difference as you are leading Never the Same camps today? What is different about the students coming into Never the Same camps today than was true 10 years ago, or true maybe even 5 years ago? We're going to come back to that COVID thing in a few minutes, but what would you say is different today than what you've seen?
Well, I've always believed that students are a byproduct. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people say, what are you seeing and where are things happening? To me, when I look at students, no matter what generation, that's where I started to go. Students are a byproduct of how they were raised and the adults that have influenced them. So a lot of it is we look in the mirror and go, where are we at as adults? What have we given to these kids? And obviously brokenness is a big theme. I mean, I always see kind of this scale where I feel the heaviness of what's happening in kids' lives, and then I see all the opportunity and joy and the optimism, and I see it both, but on the brokenness side, it's really fatherlessness is absolutely far and above number one.
Really?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, that over the years, like that has risen higher and higher, and we've seen it on data points that we have. Anecdotally, we see it all the time. That is just such a huge issue. And on the plus side, they're wide open. They're ready to be captured. They're ready for their hearts to be captured. And going back to what do we do? Industries, movements, brands, marketing strategies are more and more focused on younger people.
Yep.
And I tell you, Chris, and I hate to sound like snarky about it, but I care so much about kids. Like, I feel like the church is last in line to really understand that there are industries being built on how do we reach 12-year-olds, 14, 16, 18-year-olds.
Absolutely.
And churches, it seems like they've really, in so many areas, not every church, but in general, as I look across the landscape, I've been doing this for a few decades, I think now more than I've ever noticed, churches have lost sight of reaching young people. And that makes me really shudder to think about
the future.
Yeah, and what these churches will be reaping in 5 or 10 years if they're not diligent in this area.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what happens is that we have to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable. In other words, we're never going, if we keep doing the same thing we've always done, then we're not going to reach today's 12-year-old or 13-year-old or 14-year-old. We're just not, because they're different people. So we have to be willing to be uncomfortable and how we're engaging them. Then that's our only chance, I think, is we have to be willing to say, I got to go to where you are
Yeah.
Because I think, going back to the dark ages when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I mean, a typical 40-year-old could look at a 12-year-old and at least have some concept of what was going on in their brain. Today, that's not the case at all.
What is going on in their brain?
Exactly.
No one knows.
Now, exactly. 40-year-olds just don't have a clue because their lives have been so, in some ways, as you said, there's this interesting combination of brokenness, as you said, and so much that's available to a 12-year-old today that wasn't available to a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I know whatever, but I was born and raised in Southern California. We didn't even though I was born and raised in Southern California, we didn't have cable that ran to my street. So we were on antenna. So we had 3 channels.
Yeah.
As a 12-year-old, I had 3 channels to watch as a kid. I mean, my daughters who are 17 and 18 have no idea of what that means. They have no recollection. And a phone was something that was actually tied to a wall.
Yeah,
They
right.
have no idea. So we have to be willing to be uncomfortable to enter into their world.
We really do, yeah. And so there's a mentor friend of mine, Nigel Big Pond. He's a dear friend, elder statesman of the church in America. He shared with me a few years ago something that really changed my perspective too on that, Chris, and that is this idea of building a culture within our churches and our faith communities of young warriors and elders, what he calls them. There's the young warriors and elders. And he talked about, he really spoke into me about a walk I took a couple years ago on the Trail of Death.
Yeah.
But he said these migrations of Native Americans, whether they're forced or not, when they would literally move from place to place, it'd be like taking a whole group of people, like a church, and say, we're going to walk for the next 50 miles. And you can imagine that your youth group and kids, they're going to be energetic. They're going to be, like out in front running, maybe getting off track. And the elders, the people that have been around, they're going to be more towards the back, kind of making sure they're not outpacing themselves. And he said, so during the day, the young warriors would be in the front. And then at night in their community gatherings, the elders would sit at the front and they would sit together, and the young warriors would sit right at their feet, and the elders would share with them the values, the stories.
Wow.
And I've really thought about that a lot, that in our churches, more than any place in society, should be a place where we can have this blend of young warriors and elders. And so that our churches don't look like what I would call Instagram churches, where it's like, hey, if you're not young and hip, you can't be on the stage or on our social media stream. Or you got the opposite extreme, the elder church that says, we don't trust you until you've earned your stripes, and you got to be, here 20 years to be an usher kind of thing, And I think if we can blend those things together and start inviting these young warriors in at early stages to hear from them, but also to show them how important it is to respect the people that have been there. Because I just have seen very few churches that can do that well. And that's something I'm personally striving to do at Daybreak, is try to get this blend together.
That's awesome. And I do think that there is gold that's involved in that, and helping generations get together, older, younger, as you said, the older warriors, these young warriors. I think those conversations can be so rich, but it takes intentional effort on our part to make that happen. Those things don't just happen.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, and I understand that some of this is, you're still working out at Daybreak and we're still working out, but what would you say, what are your ideas along those lines? How do you want to get some of the people that have been around for a while and these young warriors together? What do you think that might look like at Daybreak, or what do you think it should look like in a church situation?
Well, I've thought about even things like, can we create some on-ramps for some younger leaders, maybe attend elder board meetings? I know that sounds maybe boring, but I think we might be surprised at how some of our young leaders would be interested in what that would mean to them, to invite them into specific places. And I think creating space for them to listen to each other. Some of our churches, maybe we don't have maybe we feel the freedom to be able to put some of those young warriors up in front quite yet in public spaces, but in smaller settings and gatherings, intentional mentoring opportunities. And I think Next Gen ministry is probably number one, though. I mean, with children and students, that's where you've got them in the same room on a regular basis. And really, I think sharing with volunteers the opportunity to be an elder for a young warrior is really, that can be compelling if shared in the right way, I believe.
Yeah. You know, Geoff, one of the other things that I've really appreciated about you, and I'm going to not really change gears, but we're going to go to a slightly different subject. But one of the things I've loved about you is your heart to see young people called into ministry.
Yeah.
And again, there used to be different ways that happened back in the day, but you have a passion for that. And with Never the Same camps, one of the things that you always make sure happens at those camps is that there's an opportunity for students to respond to a sense of being called into ministry. And so talk to me about that and your passion behind that and where that comes from. And
Yeah, I get calls almost on a weekly basis, text, emails, just people saying, I need pastors. Do you know a youth pastor? You know children? You hear the same thing. I hear this from a lot of people. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of names or availability. And I've been watching this for a long time. And I think it was, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, I read a article that said the coming crisis in pastoral ministry. And it was basically that the well was drying up. And, you know, the title was kind of a clickbait kind of title, like Panic. But as I read it, I thought about it, I kind of chalked it away. And I've really seen that come to pass. And a few years ago, I just started thinking about the opportunity and the responsibility of leading something like NTS Camp with thousands of kids that come to our camps, and the fact that I've gone around and I've asked pastors, hundreds in person, when did you feel called or connected? What was a pivotal step towards ministry? And I would say at least 90% were a camp, a conference, a retreat, some kind of event.
Yep.
So I started thinking about, in our movement of the Wesleyan Church, the importance of the camp moments and the conferences. And I think our conferences, we've got one coming up next year for students. I hope that our churches can understand how valuable those moments are and can really invest in that. But I think that I just sense that there's a need. There is a great need right now that I see. And I just personally feel the responsibility for where I am positionally, particularly with camp, but also now being a lead pastor, to be intentional about building a farm team at Daybreak and seeing other people in our pipeline that are kind of just calling that out in people. I think a lot of times, as I've thought, Chris, like, how's a person called? I've thought more and more about things that I've been called into, and I think it's just because there's a need.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you just happen to be there and someone goes, we need someone, would you do it? And you're the only one there. And so, and I think sometimes, I don't know, I don't want to make it less than what it is, because I believe a calling to ministry is a very holy, personal thing, but there's a great need right now. And we as leaders that lead in whatever ministry, we need to be calling that out in people that we see, because there is a need. I mean, you know this. We've talked about this.
Yeah. So, Geoff, in our closing moments together, I want to give you a opportunity for a shameless commercial for CYC. So talk to us about Claim Your Campus and, your heart and spirit for what you'd love to see happen around the country.
Yeah. I'll say one thing first, and to any leaders listening, let me just encourage them to invest, put their money where their mouth is. I think churches would say Next Gen's important, but put some money behind that, whatever that looks like.
Agreed, wholeheartedly.
Claim Your Campus is our mission is to see 1 million students united in prayer, middle and high school kids around the country. And our strategy is to show up once a week to pray. We got students active in 48 states. We just released a new app. I would encourage people to check it out, Claim Your Campus, on all the mobile platforms. But my plug is talk about it. If anyone Next Gen or pastors are listening, get this to your students. It's led by them. It's not led by adults. Students are the most effective missionaries and what I would call the most strategic mission field in America, and that's the school campus. So claimyourcampus.com is the website.
Awesome. We'll go there. Geoff, thanks so much for joining me. And here's what I pray. I pray that you'll think through, what are we doing to reach the next generation? Are we putting our money where our mouths are? Are we actually investing in them? Because they are not just the future of the church, they're the church today. And their parents could be the church today if they come as a result of you reaching them. So Do everything you can as a Spirit-anointed leader to listen to Holy Spirit and what He's saying to you and prompting you to do as a result of today's podcast. Geoff, thanks so much for being with us. I pray that you'd experience the Holy Spirit in a fresh way this week. Hey, do me a favor. Would you follow, subscribe, and share this podcast or VCast with the people around you? And here's my heart. My heart is that you'll have a fantastic week experiencing the power and the work of Holy Spirit working in you and through you. Have a great week.